Hello there, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Ken Weston. I'm a solution engineer here with LimaCharlie. I'm joined here with John Tucker today for a really exciting session. He's with the founder of Secure Annex. He's going to be talking to us about these way of detecting browser extensions, particularly malicious ones. So I'm really excited about this. And hey, John, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Ken. Great to be here.
Welcome to our podcast here. Really excited to have you on here and talking about some really cool stuff you've been building with extensions. I know it's become a bit of an issue. I think particularly in the last few months, there's been some really interesting sort of attacks that have been targeting developers themselves of extensions. So I'm really excited to see the extension that you've built here. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about kind of the origins of it and where you got started with the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give a little background, my name is John Tuckner. I'm starting up a company called Secure Annex to help teams manage and identify and really understand what's going on with browser extensions in their organizations. I think a lot of people overlook browser extensions because their EDR deals with them or just anything endpoint. Like they just take for granted that an EDR is going to understand like what a browser extension could actually be doing. And I think over the past couple of months, what we've really found is like that's not the case, or they might be a little bit reactive to those things. And so I've really identified a problem that's existing out there in the environment, and trying to come up with a solution to help teams be proactive with browser extensions and say, okay, this one's actually doing damage to my organization. It's being an info stealer. It's being an initial access broker to like external logins by capturing cookies or other sensitive internal data and exfiltrating that off to a third party. And what I think a lot of people just overlook, or they know that it's a threat to their organization, but there just really hasn't been great solutions provided so far in order to really manage them effectively at scale. So that's what I'm looking to hopefully do. And so one thing that we've built and that we'll be discussing today is an extension. That's going to be the theme today, is a LimaCharlie extension to help you enrich and understand browser extensions and be able to understand and run detection and response rules in case a browser extension goes bad, be able to react and be able to take that out of your organization as fast as possible.
That's great. Thank you. Looking forward to this. It's going to be great.
Yeah. So one thing that I can kind of start with is a demo of like what a bad browser extension can do. Now, I'll preface this by saying this isn't a browser extension that would necessarily make it into the Chrome Web Store or be something that your users will likely have installed already. But this, I do want to speak to the power of browser extensions and the permissions that can be requested by them. And so if a browser extension were to go awry, and maybe a malicious update were to happen, these are the types of behaviors that threat actors are slipping into the code of browser extensions. And potentially, this is the type of damage that could be done to your organization. So what I'm going to do here is, all right, so what we have here, I have a web server listening. You can think of this as like a third-party threat actor controlled server. And I also, in this repository, have a browser extension that will steal cookies and gather screenshots from a user's browser as they're just navigating throughout their day. So little interaction from the user, but lots of damage is the potential here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my example, and let's say you have a user browsing Git and doing their developer, they're just going about their day. I'm going to flip on this evil extension. And so now in the background, what's running is it's capturing my cookies. It's taking a screenshot. It's looking for any form data. And if I go back to here, we're seeing that screenshots are being saved of my browser and browser activity. I'm going to go back here. I'm just going to like log out. I'm going to sign back in. I'm actually going to use a passkey. I think this is like the most advanced type of authentication that we have these days. Go back into my source code. And if I go back to the server, not only am I still grabbing screenshots and seeing where the crown jewels are in a source code repository, I've now captured the cookies for my GitHub authentication. So if I were to like go and copy these cookies off, I'm going to go to another window, and I'm going to import these cookies that say me, the threat actor, has captured from this user, and I'll import them. Now, if I were to refresh this was an incognito session. I wasn't logged in, no trickery here, but now I'm impersonating that user, and I'm able to see the same source code repositories. I'm able to act as that user, right? And not only is it me as a threat actor flying blind in here, but I now have like this trail of wherever this user was going and what they were visiting and what they were clicking on to know what might be the actual goods that I now have access to in this GitHub repo. This is just one application. As this user is going across and browsing and doing their work, say going to Snowflake or going to any of these other sensitive apps that are now SaaS apps, like all of this is taken off just like the desktop. Now all of this type of information and info stealing can be captured by a threat actor that might have gotten access through a malicious browser extension. That's kind of like the general impact that browser extensions are having nowadays to organizations. And I think that's like super scary. We've seen this with we've seen this with just recently over the Christmas period. There was an incident involving a company called Cyberhaven that their developers ended up having their credentials compromised or their access compromised, and the threat actor was able to push out a malicious version of a browser extension to their entire client base. And so that ended up being it wasn't just Cyberhaven, it was another like 10 or so organizations that also had the same let's say compromised code being pushed to them, which ended up with like over 1.5 million users that were using these browser extensions. This type of capability where the cookies are being captured while user is browsing and being exfiltrated off to a third party. That was all present in the exploited code that the threat actor was pushing.
Yeah, it's horrifying. I mean, the targets that they're going after for a lot of these, it seems like it's been developers. I've kind of noticed this sort of shifting left. Instead of targeting just end users, actually going after developers to get access to source code that they can, potentially compromise, some of their users downstream, right? That's having a significant impact. Like we've even seen in North Korea and things like that. So this sort of threat really is pretty serious. And I thought it was something that was like something that was sort of taken care of by Google in the marketplace, but they really haven't been able to kind of control this very well.
Well, it's really tough, right? Cyberhaven is just a perfect example of what could really go wrong, in that Cyberhaven is a trusted security browser extension that has true real purpose. And, they honestly did a really great job of protecting and managing their user access to the source code repository. It was just a really brilliant compromise. And then the after effect is that you have a number of organizations that trusted this browser extension, like without question. That was now the source of compromise for a lot of these organizations. And the only thing that you can really do is be able to understand, either Google needs to stop that update of the extension, that auto update, that once the source code is pushed up to the Google Web Store, that gets delivered to all of their users. Or you need to, as an organization or a Cyberhaven, or there's a couple checkpoints here, but none of them are easy. You have to understand what the version over version difference is that the source code is presenting, and the different risk factors there. So, let me go back to what I'm building to help people deal with this. So, what Secure Annex does is it will take a look at all extensions that exist on the Chrome Web Store, and it will understand a bunch of the features, attributes of these extensions, and then start understanding them with AI. So this is there's hundreds of thousands of extensions that exist out in the world. And it's going to be nearly impossible for a human being to be able to review, do like source code review through obfuscated code and understand, is this URL malicious? Is this behavior malicious? Anything like that. There's only like so many people that even truly understand how browser extensions work. So what I've been doing is I've been putting together all of this information that's not just the source code, but it's the owner of the publisher of the extension. It's what the extension claims to be doing. It's the reviews. It's pulling out signatures and vulnerabilities that might exist in the extension, and matching that all up with AI and saying, okay, given all of this, what is this extension actually doing? Does this actually pose a threat? And can we actually get this information out to organizations through executive summary, or at least something that a security analyst or an engineer that might not have ever worked with a browser extension before, they can understand like, what is the actual purpose of this browser extension? And is it carrying out the purpose, or is it doing something shady behind the scenes? And so this is a view into, say, one extension that claims to be doing online antivirus protection, but what it really does is it overwrites your Omnibox search. So it redirects all searches to a domain called chromeapps.site, and then I think end up redirecting you back to Google, but they're capturing basically all of your web searches. This isn't something that most companies would want to have in their systems. This is a very benign, straightforward example. There's other examples of extensions that are selling off clickstream data to third-party advertisers, but once your internal Jira URLs or your Jenkins or anything like that, some of these with sensitive headers, once they start getting captured by these browser extensions and sent off as ways of monetization for these extensions, that is going to present a huge risk to an organization, and possibly, like, these are very tricky things to figure out once a compromise happens, to go back and say, okay, how did somebody get this information when I have these like FIDO like type password flows and conditional access and all of this? How are these sessions being exfiltrated out of my organization? Or how does somebody know? How has somebody performed recon against all of my internal URLs that are web accessible, but very much prevented through geographic or conditional access type policies? This is the app that I'm creating with Secure Annex, and there's a couple other features like being able to watch extensions and be able to fire off alerts when there's a new event, so like an ownership change, or if a extension has been deemed malicious as a verdict, or if a browser extension goes into a different visibility state. I'm trying to be proactive and give teams these alerts. But something that we've also built with the amazing LimaCharlie team, Whitney Champion, everybody that's been so supportive, is we now have the LimaCharlie extension in the store. It's called EXT Secure Annex. And this will provide you structured data from my API, from all my enrichment stores, into like your endpoint agent. And you'll be able to run detection and response rules now against the data that's in Secure Annex, but now within LimaCharlie, and be able to react really quickly to any condition that you want to think up.
That's huge. I mean, I think about this, like, it's one thing to have policies around these extensions, but it looks like even the attackers are finding ways of circumventing those policies, right? Either, targeting, an authorized extension, compromising that in some fashion. So I can really see why the time really is of the essence in this type of an attack, where access to source code and secrets, and, if someone does compromise like those sessions, how much time do they have to dwell within that environment? So I can see why the automation side of things and the detection and response is critically important here.
And the attacks they happen as they happen, right? And they're very impactful. There's this element of compliance, or just kind of management, being able to say, these are the approved extensions in our organization, and say whether or not you're even allowing new extensions in, or do they fall into line with what your best policies are, that you can write these rules around as well. So here's a couple examples of this is how you would write a rule for remote access. So there's been a number of compromises with people installing remote access tools as a browser extension. Let's say you have a hash block list, so no remote access tools are being able to be installed on your desktops, but through a browser extension, that's perfectly fine. Now, if you were to install one of those extensions and it was to come through this telemetry feed, you can then say, okay, is this extension a remote access tool or a proxy avoidance tool? Now we are firing an alert when those types of tools are being installed, and you can go to that endpoint and begin to disable that extension or be able to even know that that user now has a remote access tool being installed with it. There's a couple other extensions that Winnie wrote that they go along with this. So you can detect new vulnerabilities. So think about this as a vulnerability management program a little bit too. So if you don't want the software that your users are using to have higher critical vulnerabilities involved in them, it's really interesting how vulnerabilities can be used in a Chrome extension. You know, if you have a website that knows that there's like a parser error in a certain extension, and maybe that can compromise the extension that way. That's really interesting. But some of the teams I've been talking to are really interested in the vulnerabilities or the types of permissions that are being requested by the extension, or if there's a high risk rating tied to any of the extensions, or let's see, suspicious conditions is another really interesting detection. If the manifest hasn't been updated lately, if the rating is lower than 3, if there's lower than 1 million users, this goes on and on. It's pretty comprehensive. Maybe there's something that matches all these conditions, but this is probably a pretty solid way of saying, okay, if it meets these conditions, then I know that this extension probably shouldn't be in my organization.
I mean, it's interesting to be able to write detection based on, what it has access to, and being able to do a risk scoring of it kind of in real time. I think that's really intriguing.
Yeah, I really haven't seen it elsewhere through other vendors. And so to me, this is a very first of its kind type capability to teams that really want to roll this out and have that understanding. If they've gone through and done these like maturity layers of doing application allow listing and being able to really understand like what's happening on the endpoint that's installed, this layer of like browser extensions often isn't managed to the same level of specificity or rigor. And so a lot of people or a lot of users end up installing things as browser extensions just to get around internal controls that don't allow for, you take away admin rights, but these are applications that are installed without admin required functionality, right?
So shadow IT through extensions, basically.
Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah. And I don't want to throw a bunch of people under the bus, but I've had a number of conversations with users that need to install a VPN in order to get around internal controls because their IT isn't allowing them to do it. But let me tell you, there's a number of free VPNs that are all stealing your information on the as browser extensions. And it's really interesting that that's the dynamic that teams and organizations are creating.
Well, it's a great way to get visibility, I think, into a problem that maybe a lot of IT and security organizations didn't realize they had. So I'm curious, how can folks get started with this? Like, I know anyone can set up a community edition of LimaCharlie to get started for free. Are there any costs associated with this extension at all? Or how do people get started with it?
Yeah, I've been working with the LimaCharlie team for so many years, and I really appreciate their model, your all's model on allowing people to like get up and going, find the information that they really need in order to get started. So like this, it's the extension is easy to subscribe to in the LimaCharlie marketplace. Go in and subscribe to that. And then on my end, what you'll need is an API key. So when you sign up for my service, if you go to settings, API, you'll get an API key here. You bring that back into LimaCharlie. We go to extensions here, and you can set the LimaCharlie API key in here, and it'll start pulling in data automatically. This is what the data ends up looking like over the time period. So you'll see, you'll go into the sensor the timeline. You'll be able to see these AI generated analysis, signatures, extensions. There's there's so much data available to a user in order to create these detection rules. I pick out URLs that I find in the extension. So let's say you have an IOC feed. If you're able to match that up with the URLs that are seen in the extension, then you have a great alerting mechanism to say that this URL might be matched up with a extension. But these are all the types of things that you can do with just putting in an API key. And then if you were to have too many sensors, or my API is all just quota based. So you'll have a set number of API calls that are being made automatically. And then if you need more quota, happy to work with your team.
That's great. Makes sense. I like it too, because you also have a lot of detections and things that folks can get started with. Because again, I think a lot of folks don't know where to get started with these sorts of extensions. We know, maybe our Windows or sysmod logs and things like that, but what to look for in those extensions. So it's really great that you and Whitney work together and kind of put some of those together for folks. So I think that's a great way to get started.
Yeah, I think that's like the number one thing here that for a number of teams that I've been working with in this kind of maturity framework that people are working off of. It's step one, get visibility, as with most things in security, get visibility into what you actually have installed and be able to say, this is the extension and the version that we have, and then be able to look up and be able to automate some of those portions. So you can say, okay, this is what this extension is actually doing, giving you this ability to react whenever an incident like Cyberhaven were to exist, or if you were to just read a new article about a new extension being compromised, you'll be able to look that up much easier. LimaCharlie's been really good at already capturing a lot of the extension information, but the next layer of these things is not just looking at the permissions or looking at what version that the extension is at, but being able to enrich it with true additional threat intelligence to say, what is this extension actually doing with the permissions that it requests?
That's great. Yeah. I'm just amazed that like just the visibility alone is going to be so helpful. And then, all the automated detection and response capabilities as well. Is there any cool response actions like you've done, like disabling extensions across an organization or anything like that you've been working on?
No, I haven't yet. That's really interesting. And I can totally think that teams will definitely want to get there. It's really interesting to see how that gets executed through Google Workspace policies or through people just ripping extensions from, say, like a endpoint registry. I really haven't gotten to the point where people are actually responding like that right now. But yeah, that's exactly how I think teams should be going about their business. Great.
Is there anything else that we should cover or show?
No, I think that's really the gist of it. Please take a look at Secure Annex, sign up, take a peek around if you're interested in browser extensions. Definitely get in touch with me. Happy to work with your team and work through it. And I think this extension that's in LimaCharlie Marketplace really unlocks a lot of potential for people that run managed services through LimaCharlie, or just run it as an organization to get visibility to this type of threat and risk that a lot of other endpoints and a lot of other teams aren't really thinking strategically about. So I think it's a really unique
the great thing is, folks, you can get started right away. Again, you can just use the community edition, the free version of LimaCharlie. You have 2 sensors, 2 orgs, but unlimited capabilities here for bringing in some of this data. I really want to thank John Tuckner again for presenting this, as well as working so closely with our team on getting this thing to market. It's really amazing. Really excited to see what people are going to be coming up with. If folks do want to reach out to John, we are all on our community Slack channel, so feel free to reach out to us there if you have maybe questions about how to leverage the extension or feedback, or if you have really cool ideas. Again, kind of we were talking about on the response side, some cool detection logic I see people come up with. That's a really great place to share it. And with that, I want to thank John again for your time here. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ken.